Welcome to the 401k Audit CPA Success Show, where we're 100% focused on helping companies across the United States prepare for their 401k audit. If you have 100 eligible participants in your 401k plan, then this podcast is for you.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's podcast. As always, Kim has come up with a really good topic for us. So, as with any accounting firm, this is a topic that you should think about all the time. And I think obviously not only the accounting firm, but to your clients as an accounting firm. So obviously for all the HR departments out there and any business, really, it's we're going to talk about cybersecurity. So, Kim, I think this will be a great topic, and I'm excited to dig into this. So, welcome to the show.
Oh, well, thank you, Jamie. I'm glad to be here. Yeah, I think this is a topic that, we all hear about in the news, just kind of in general, and big hot topic with things that have happened with the government here recently, too, on cybersecurity. So it's, I thought, timely topic. The other reason I wanted to bring this up, we've had several conferences that the team has been attending. We go to conferences that are specifically about benefit plans, and they're sponsored by the AICPA, our kind of professional body, as well as other state societies that oversee accountants. And in all of those cases, Department of Labor personnel have been there, and this is like the first thing on their list to talk about is cybersecurity. So definitely it is on the regulators list of concerns. So obviously that's one reason why we want to be concerned about it. Another reason, because I know people are kind of like, oh, cybersecurity, of course, yeah, that's, and they kind of just blow it off because they're like, well, of course, that's always there. And why do I really need to even worry about this? We want to point out that if you are a plan sponsor, so you're a company sponsoring a 401k plan, or you're one of the main individuals that work with the plan at your company. So you're a plan administrator, a plan trustee. Obviously, probably if you're in HR or the benefits area, this would all apply to you. You are a named fiduciary to the plan. So you are responsible for everything that happens to that plan. If something were to happen, so there was an attack against the plan, or we're going to talk a little bit later, individual participant type transactions that can happen that weren't authorized by the participant. So maybe not a major, big, huge attack against a whole provider, but maybe one individual has something happen. You are responsible for that. And there have been lawsuits around this area. We expect there to be more. Obviously, it is your responsibility to ensure security around the assets held by the plan, even though you don't hold them. I mean, the company is not physically holding them. They have a provider that's doing that. You're still responsible. So it's another reason why, we wanted to bring it up. Don't just think, hey, I hired that service provider, so I don't need to worry about it. It's their problem. No, that's no, it's not how it works. Obviously.
Yeah, as you say, also, I was going to say, I think the other reason too, and I'm not sure we mentioned this yet, but the other thing is the large dollar amounts. Some of these plans have quite a bit of money in them, and anytime there's money, that's a lot of times where the cybersecurity crooks follow. They follow, okay, where can I find the money, and where can I get in there and get that money out? So.
Absolutely. And I know the DOL has talked a lot about that, and also with the pandemic, folks have lost their jobs, or maybe, just all kinds of situations where they may need some extra cash. Obviously these plans have a lot of money. They know there are vulnerabilities associated with them. We're going to talk a little bit more about that here in a minute. So that's where they're going to go. So we expect there probably to be more activity. I from what I've seen from a legal standpoint, of course, you don't know if it's handled internally, but from what you can see from the outside, they've been more one-off type of events. We haven't really seen where a big provider like a Fidelity's had a big hack event. That's not to say it couldn't happen tomorrow. I mean, there's events happening all the time. But from what we've seen, they have been more at an individual level. So that is interesting and makes the risk different. That's not something, when people think of cybersecurity, they think of, these big companies, and they read about in the news where, an outsider, sometimes from a foreign country, gets in and attacks their website or their IT systems, and they're able to get in. And that's what they think of with cybersecurity. And that is certainly a big part of it, but that's not the only risk here. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But Yeah, it's definitely a big issue, big dollars. There have been instances of it. There have been court cases. So definitely an area for everybody to be concerned about.
Yeah, no, I think definitely. I think it's something that if you're not thinking about it, then you're not doing your due diligence as part of a plan. You're not doing your fiduciary right. So I think you have to make sure you think about it and address it. So let's dive right into it. So what should we be doing? What should we be thinking about?
Yeah, I've kind of broken this out into a couple of different paths to take. I mean, the first thing we talked about this a little already, that the assets are actually held by someone else in almost all cases. So you have a trust company or some type of service provider that's actually holding the assets. And the criminals or the fraudsters out there, obviously they want to get a hold of the cash. They want to convert those assets into cash and get them into their hands instead of with your provider that's holding the assets. So that's where I would start. First of all, is you should know who actually physically holds the assets, which may be different. I talked to a lot of our clients and potential clients and ask them who are they utilizing as their service provider, and they will oftentimes tell me a record keeper or a TPA, the people that they're working with on a day-to-day basis for the participant level transactions, or if they have a question or a participant has a question. That's who they work with. But most of the time, those folks do not hold the assets. It's usually some type of custodial arrangement. Now, it may be through the same company. So, example, Fidelity has a trust company that they use. So it may still be Fidelity, but it's not those same people you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So anyways, the first thing you got to do is figure out who's actually holding the assets. Once you figure that out, I would just start asking a few questions. So ask them, have they had any breaches? Number one. Maybe they had some before you were using them as a service provider, or maybe they did and they didn't tell you. So I think it's a good question to ask. If they have, you'd obviously want to find out more information about that. If they say no, never had that problem, then another set of questions to ask is, have you thought about that? So what if you did? What would you do? Do you have a plan? How would I be notified? So you kind of go down that path of just trying to figure out, has this happened? If not, how would it be handled? And how would you be notified around that?
Is that a question they're required to answer? Again, they couldn't come back with, there's certain rights we can't answer that question or anything like that. Or is this something
I don't. I mean, I suppose anybody cannot answer a question, but and again, we're going to talk a little bit later in our session here about what do you do if you really are uncomfortable with the situation. I think you're going to have to judge it on a facts and circumstances basis. So, and make sure that you're asking the question to the right person. Again, if it's your person that's just a rep on the plan and they're handling day-to-day transactions, they may not know, because that's probably a whole different area of the company. So don't just say, oh, well, they didn't know, I'm going to switch companies here. So make sure you get the right person. But if you kind of ask around and they won't answer the question, they're hedging, I don't know, that would make me think they don't have a plan, and that would make me uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. So, but I don't think there's any reason now. Certainly, if you're trying to say, well, what are all your specific controls in your IT department to prevent, an outsider getting in, those could be confidential, and I could see someone not wanting to divulge that. That would make sense. But just asking, have you had a breach, or not? And if you did have one, what would be your process? What would you do? I don't think that's in any way confidential. You certainly have a plan, and they should be able to communicate it to you. And I wouldn't be surprised if they don't already have a brochure and they can just say, here you go. Here's the brochure that answers all your questions. I would think the big providers would certainly have that. So, so I would hope they would answer your question. If not, I think that, calls for a little further evaluation if they can't answer or refuse to answer. Then the next thing that we kind of get into is when you're talking about, have they had a breach, or have they, made plans around the breach? There are levels of insurance that you can get. So, that would be something, and this they maybe would divulge or not, I'm not sure, but you could ask them if there was a breach and it was not through any fault of your plan. So your plan didn't do anything. You just had assets with them and someone broke into their IT system from an external source. what would they be prepared to reimburse the plan for losses? And a lot of times that's going to get into an insurance situation. So that would be another thing that you could ask them. Do they cover that? Or is there expectation that you're covering that? Because obviously, if you're supposed to be covering it, you would need to know that, and, would have to handle that. So, that's kind of the first avenue I would go down. The second avenue, this gets a little bit more detailed, and I think you have to have a little bit of IT knowledge to kind of get into some of these things. So if you don't have that kind of background, then I would suggest that you maybe talk to someone in your IT department, go do a little bit of research before you kind of go down this path, get a little bit of background knowledge if this isn't an area that you're real familiar with. And we're going to talk about looking at the controls over the data, which data would be personal information about your participants, personal information about your company, personal information about the service providers, and then information about the assets. All four of those things would be included here. And we want to make sure that you're looking at kind of all the avenues. So stop and think. If you really have to almost step back and say, if I wanted to commit a fraud, how would I do it? What kinds of information would I need? How would I go about this? And then as you think down through, a couple, 3, 4 scenarios, you'll come up with more information that you might need to be asking or you might need to know, and additional areas that you can look at. So we always suggest look internally, because you have information internally, primarily in your HR payroll areas, that a fraudster could exploit. So that's one place you got to look. Secondly, is your service providers. As we mentioned, your record keeper has information, similar information actually. The asset holder has information about the assets. And then you also have to worry about your payroll provider, because the payroll system has, of course, information about your employees, social security numbers, addresses, pay, are they in the plan or not? All that's in your payroll system as well. So you kind of have to split out all of those 4 things and then go down this avenue and say, what kinds of avenues could a fraudster use to get access to the information? What would they do with it? And how is there any way I would know if someone did get access to it that shouldn't have? So that's kind of what we're gonna be talking about here. So let's.
I think the one thing too here is make sure you use your resources. Depending on the size company you are, you probably have some sort of IT department or some sort of people that are somewhat familiar with IT. So again, you're not in this alone. You can bring them into it and have them take a look at it, because obviously they're building controls around your company and they understand the controls maybe a little better than you do. So don't be afraid to use the people within your company, or even people that your company consults with.
Absolutely. And there, you mentioned the consulting. There are firms that will come in and do some of these IT reviews. Now, they're not specifically targeting 401k plans. They're more general, company type reviews. But you could certainly ask them to look at this as well. Or, as you mentioned, your IT personnel would be a good resource. Also, don't be afraid if you have an internal audit function, they should have knowledge around this area. Or if you have an external auditor, not necessarily for your 401k plan, maybe just an external auditor that audits your company financial information, they have to look at IT controls as well. So they should have someone that could help you with this. Obviously, you might have to pay a little bit more for that kind of consulting, but they should certainly have folks to help you with this. So a very good point, Jamie. So let's start with a service provider, because this might be the easier way to focus. Service providers would, of course, include those record keepers, your custodian, and your payroll service provider. All of those entities, if they're large enough, should have something called a SOC report. We've talked about this on previous podcasts. That's a report that they've hired an external accountant to come in and document their controls and then test those controls. And they, in almost all cases, will be testing IT controls. So we're going to talk a little bit about the IT controls you should be concerned with here next. But good avenue is to get a hold of those SOC reports. Those are easily available. Just ask whoever your rep is. They should be able to get that to you. And then it will actually detail what the controls are. It'll show you that the accountant tested those controls. If there were any problems noted, they'll detail those as well. So that's another thing that can give you comfort that there are controls at my service provider. They have been tested, they were found to be okay or not. And if not, then they'll usually give you additional information about how that they're going to fix whatever the problems were that were noted. So that's a good resource without you having to try to call up a Fidelity and say, hey, I want to know about your IT controls. And, you're not an expert in that. This is a way to get at that without having to, dig into it and doing it yourself. So that's probably the best place for those service providers. You can go down the avenue trying to do it yourself, but I would recommend the service providers. Again, if you use an auditor, you can ask them if they've reviewed this report. They usually are pretty good at reviewing them. They can point out any issues they noted. So that would be another avenue. So you don't have to take time to do it. Just ask them what,
It's been a while since I've looked at one of these reports, but I remember looking at them back when I was in doing 401k audits, and they actually are pretty easy to read. Like they call out the errors, they call out how many, they call out whether it's sufficient or not. And so you kind of get a pretty good idea from it with just basic reading comprehension. So I don't think they're overly complicated. No. It's not like you're reading a 10K where it's like, okay,
no.
what am I trying to figure out here?
No. And they're real easy when you're looking at the test. If you don't want to dig into all the details of the test, it's basically almost going to be a yes or no to pass or fail.
Yeah.
And if it's a no, then there'll be more description, but the yeses are pretty, you just go down, boom, boom, yep, they're all good.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it could be a pretty quick review. So let's talk internally now. There's a couple of things internally that we suggest people focus on. One is more IT related, and it relates to single sign-on. So if your company uses single sign-on type password and access security, so as I come in to work in the morning and I sign in once, and then internally with the system that kind of directs me it signs me into all my other systems. You've got to worry then about the security around that single sign-on. Again, if you use that, or if you're not sure, I talk to your IT group. They're at your company. That's an easy question for them. They can tell you yes or no. If it's yes, obviously if it's no, this is a non-issue. If it's yes, what are their controls around that? How do they make sure that gets updated? Things like that. So that's one place I would definitely look at. Another thing I would worry about is, we all talk about everything's paperless. We don't use paper anymore, but in reality, we all still use paper. And so your HR department, your payroll department, those are the two main places. Anything where you've got employee information, maybe that's in finance too, in some cases, or in a tax or a compliance area, if you have such a function in your company. Any of those places where you're going to have company employee type information, you want to make sure that those areas are physically secured. You don't want to leave, somebody signs an I-9 and you leave it on your desk while you go to lunch. You got to be really careful. It sounds silly, but that's one of the best ways for a fraudster. And you got to consider fraudsters could be inside your company as well. So you got to be careful. Don't leave any of that stuff out where people can see it. Don't leave blank forms out either, because somebody could, if you're using paper forms for people to do a disbursement out of their account, they can grab up a few of those, take the people that sit around them, put in their information and send them in and see if they can get them to get processed. So just be careful.
Not necessarily even a fraudster too. I know the HR office, at least in companies I've worked in, is pretty heavy foot traffic. And so, just leaving those stuff out and leaving those on a desk unattended, there's going to be a lot of people walking through there that might see something unintentionally that, I know HR departments are usually pretty careful about. But again, like I said, those areas are usually pretty heavy traffic, people coming in and checking and asking questions or doing hiring or whatever they're doing. A lot of that flows through the HR office. So you just want to make sure that you're careful with that stuff anyways.
Yeah, very good point, because it could be, potential candidates you're interviewing. It could be people that you're terminating service. And so, all kinds of things can happen with that. So, definitely want to check that. So from there, then I wanted to get into it. So, okay, so I need to check all this stuff. What exactly do I need to check? So I'm not going to go into, we're not going to make this an IT course here, but just try to run through these fairly quickly. First thing, of course, is passwords. Passwords is one of the best controls you have to get into any system or keep people out of a system. So obviously you want to make sure that you do have password controls. So that's the length of the password, complexity of the password. Shouldn't be able to just put in 1, 2, 3, 4, and there I go. It should require you to have them a certain complexity. They should have to be changed periodically. So that would cover, you should look for those in that SOC report we talked about. You should also look internally because people are going to potentially access their 401k plan while they're at work. You also will have HR and payroll personnel that will be accessing the plan from a plan level perspective. They probably have what we call administrator level access, which is a higher level access. They can usually do more things. They have access to information that an individual participant would not have. So you want to make sure that the passwords for those folks are really strong. They're changed regularly. Make sure that the people that actually have that access need to have it. Make sure you review that regularly. If someone moves around so they're not in that role anymore, that access should go away immediately. You do not want to leave that on, and I'll change it when I get around to it. Even though the person's still here, that's the prime way for there to be a problem. So
I would imagine nowadays, most of these companies do give you those options. Most providers will give you the options to have pretty complex password requirements, but sometimes you do have to elect them, I'd imagine as well. So like, you can elect, okay, five letters. Okay, probably not that good. Where you can say, okay, 10 characters, and they have to be 3 different types of characters. Like you can select things like that. That'll make it a little more complex. And again, oftentimes those are really up to you as the company to choose what those are.
That's right. And some of this is going to be internal as well as external. So you kind of got to look at all the different ways that you might be accessing the plan. But yeah, you're right. A lot of the big providers have that built in. So that may be easy. Another thing, I call this know your customer controls, but one of the things that you'll want to ask your service provider is how do they accept transaction information from their customer, which would be your employee, your participant. So if I'm in your plan and I want to take a loan out, how do I do that? In a lot of cases, it isn't a paper form anymore. They may be allowed to go online with my password and that to request it, but I also may be able to call. So I get on the phone, I call the provider. Hey, I'm Susie Jones. I'm with plan ABC. I want to take a loan. What do I need to do? And you can process it right over the phone. That's been around for a long time. So one of the big controls there is how do they make sure it's Susie Jones? I mean, I could be calling and saying I'm Susie, and that's where that information that HR and payroll have and securing that is so important, because if I can get some information on Susie, I can call up and pretend to be Susie. And a lot of times the lawsuits I've been seeing have been in this space. So those controls weren't that good. The provider is making some assumptions that sounds like Susie. She's got some information I would think she's probably would, need to know to be able to call in. They go ahead and process it, come to find out. Susie then 2-3 months later goes and looks at her participant statement and why is there a $200,000 disbursement here? Of course, the money's long gone. They have no idea who actually got the money. So this is an actual real world loss situation. So, the big providers are trying to be really careful in this area, but that all comes down to the person answering the phone. So again, I would be really careful in that area. I would talk to them about it, try to find out, what are the controls in that area. Look at the SOC report again. SOC report should talk about this. But another control that you can have in this space is, again, the fraudsters want the money out of the plan. They don't care about the money going in. They don't care about the investments. Are they making money or not? They only care about getting money out. And then there's really only 2 big ways to do that, a disbursement or a loan. So if you're reviewing those transactions and you see, Susie still works here. Susie just took a $200,000, put a request in for a $200,000 disbursement. What's going on? Call Susie, go down, walk down the hall and say, hey, did you actually do this? You can stop it before it happens. So that's why we recommend you review all of those transactions. You don't have to be investigating every single one, but if you see something that looks a little odd, that'd be a good time to go check it.
I think a lot of companies do the two-factor authorization too. Like if I'm calling in and trying to do something like that before they even do my identity, they either, okay, well, we're going to send an email code to you, or we're going to text you a code. And again, a lot of times people can get your information, but they don't necessarily have your email or your phone number. So I think that's another smart control that I've seen. Again, I know it's kind of annoying on our side when I have to call in and wait for the text to come in, but I get why companies are doing it. So.
Right. And it is just for that reason. It's verifying you really are who you are, because, people can get a hold of passwords, and they're not as secure as they used to be. So another thing that we talked about already was the physical security. You want to look at physical security, as we mentioned, within your HR payroll department, but you also want to look at that in the SOC report. Make sure physical security at your provider is good, because just as you could leave information laying around, provider could do the same thing. You also need to be concerned about physical security around their data center. And that should all be documented in the SOC report. Probably a little technical. That gets into a little technical bit. Same thing with the next thing on the list is backups. That can get a little bit technical. It doesn't sound like it, but it actually can get a little technical when you're actually reading the SOC report. So just make sure that that's covered in the report. Make sure there were no issues there. If there were, you want to follow up. Usually in those SOC reports, the issues we tend to see are around access security. So they're not reviewing the folks with IDs routinely. And so a person will move from one job to another, a person leaves the company, and they're not shutting the access off timely. That's the type of errors that we see the most often in the IT sections of those SOC reports. So not to say you couldn't have them in these other areas, but that's really what we see the most. So pay particular attention in those areas on the SOC reports. We mentioned about the distributions and the loans. Take a look at those, review those on a regular basis. And we talked about the hard copy amounts being left out. So those are kind of the areas. There's certainly a lot of other areas that you could think about. And I encourage you to just sit down, take a half an hour, kind of do this risk assessment in your head. If I was going to conduct a fraud, how would I do it? Make some notes and then go, trace that down through the controls and make sure that you feel comfortable with the controls in all of those locations we talked about. I
think it's also important to document that process. I know we've talked about this in other podcasts, but okay, if I'm going to spend an hour once every 6 months doing that and reviewing the SOC report and asking questions and thinking through it and really evaluating the risks, it is important just to document that you did that, because, you have auditors come in and say, okay, what do you do for controls? And say, hey, look at this memo I created 6 months ago because I did that.
We would love that. We would love that. If we could get some of our clients to do that, we would absolutely love that. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And the other thing it helps you with, if something does happen, it will protect you in the event of a lawsuit, because what the people are alleging in the lawsuit is that there was no oversight.
Yeah.
No one at the company was looking, no one at the provider was looking. It was just a free for all. And you just took my money and just let it fly out the door. And if you can sit here and say, no, we actually went through and look what we did. It doesn't mean you're still not going to be liable for anything, but it will certainly help protect you, from all of those kind of excessive penalties and that you might be exposed to.
Sure.
So yeah, very good comment there, Jamie. So if you do all this and you're like, oh, I found some things in that SOC report that make me feel uncomfortable, or I'm not so sure about our controls over this area. What should you do? Well, internally, obviously you have the opportunity to fix that. We always, people are always like, yeah, well, now I got to go spend money because I got to, I've got to change things, or I've got to have somebody doing an extra task that they weren't doing before. But consider, yes, it's a small investment and nobody likes to make those, but is it worth the bigger investment you'll have to make if there's a loss? Because if there's a breach, it's going to be very expensive. And you will be exposed to all kinds of scrutiny from all kinds of regulators, and like I said, potentially a lawsuit. So a small investment now is definitely worth it. Definitely something that you would want to talk to probably your supervisor about, is whether it's worth making that investment. And if you decide not to, again, document why, because that could come back to bite you. From the service provider side, as we mentioned, there's, got the SOC report. You may want to talk to your rep if you're seeing things in that SOC report that make you uncomfortable. Again, that's not the rep that you deal with on a day-to-day basis that's processing the loans and that, but more like your sales rep, someone from a higher level standpoint, and just explain why you feel uncomfortable. They may be able to provide some additional information to help get you there. They may talk about some ongoing initiatives that can help, that aren't quite there yet, but will be soon, and that may make you feel better. In the long run, if you don't feel comfortable, you really should consider changing. I know that's painful. I know that's, none of us want to do that for a lot of reasons, but again, in the long run, best interest of the plan, which is what you as a fiduciary are supposed to be watching out for, that may be the best long-term solution. So if that's the case, you need to have that discussion. Again, I would talk to your supervisor, and obviously that's an ongoing discussion you'll have to have. But
and I think the overarching theme, obviously, with every 401k podcast we do and every conversation we've had is you have to remember what you're doing here. You are dealing with people's investments that are funding their retirement. And so, you want to make sure that you're not just not thinking through these things. And if you have that pit in your stomach that, this doesn't feel right to me, you got to act on it, because you are not just dealing with your company, you're dealing with a bunch of people's and their money. So I think that is really important. And I think final thoughts here, Kim. We've taken up a lot of time here. We're almost to the end of the episode, believe it or not. And so I know I knew this would be a big topic and a lot of depth here. But any final thoughts for our listeners to make sure that they're considering when it comes to cybersecurity?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to pass along that obviously critical area. You want to spend some time, even though I know it's hard for people and it's not where you want to. That's not where a lot of people's interests lie, but it is very important. At these conferences we've been at, both the Department of Labor and the AICPA, which that's the American Institute of CPAs, if you go on their website, just Google cybersecurity. Both of those institutions have little booklets, pamphlets, one-pagers that can give you some additional information. So if this is an area kind of piqued your interest, you're like, I'd kind of like to do that. I'd like to know a little bit more. There's more information out there. Obviously, you can just Google cybersecurity too, and it'll get you stuff. But both of the websites of the Department of Labor and the AICPA, specific to benefit plans, there is information, big focus. So there's a lot of new information out there, and they'll give you specific guidance. Always, we're happy to help consult. If you have any questions too, just give us a call. We'd be happy to help you out and give you our thoughts on your specific situation. If you've got something unique you'd like to, talk through.
Perfect. Well, I think this is a big topic, Kim. I think you did a great job covering it. We're very precise, and I think a lot to walk away with, and people are taking their notes from this podcast. So I appreciate all the research you did and you attending those. I'm sure there are 4 or 5 hour conferences of people talking about this stuff and summarizing it in 30 minutes for us. So definitely appreciate that.
Thank you.
Enjoyed this episode? Visit our website at summitcpa.net to get more tips and strategies for achieving 401k audit success. We're here to be a resource with ever-changing rules and regulations.